I can't begin to tell you what an honor it is to be here today. As a family, there generally isn't a day that goes by when we're in public that we don't have people that come up and talk about their experience while Elizabeth was gone and their prayers and their searches for her. And as a family, we will ever be grateful for that. Our ability to move forward is something that I think many people struggle with in life. Bad things happen and we question, well, why did that happen to me? Or life is unfair. And certainly many people, not just those that are abducted, those that find themselves in a position that they never thought they would. As I've been working in the area of trafficking, of abduction, of abuse, I've learned a couple of things. One of them is that when a person usually finds themselves in a bad situation, many times there have been many things that have led them to that point. Certainly pornography is one of those issues. And when I think of what effect it had on our family, I can think back to Brian David Mitchell and some of the things that happened while the court case was going on. We learned that Brian, at a very young age, was exposed to pornography. We learned that subsequent to that he molested a girl. That subsequent to that, he exposed his own children to pornography. That at one point he was taken to a point that he felt it was justified in his mind to abduct a girl, and in the end that his primary goal was to have sex with a young girl. And talking about pornography, the proliferation of pornography is something that is very difficult. It's a hard topic. In fact, as Pamela started talking, she said, today's conference is really about hope. And I want to start off by sharing with you a piece that Elizabeth recently recorded with a group called Faith Counts. And Faith Counts is not a LDS, it is not a Catholic, but it is a collaboration of efforts to talk about faith, and I just want to quickly share this with you.
I have a knife at your neck. Don't make a sound. Get up and come with me. If you cry out, I will kill you and your family. I grew up in a family that instilled a very strong sense of faith in me. During the next 9 months of my kidnapping, I had no idea just how much I would have to rely upon that faith. I will never forget the first time I was raped. I will never forget how broken and shattered I felt. I felt like I had been a vase that had been smashed far beyond repair. And as I sat there, I began to think about my mom, and all the different things she used to say to me came back to my memory, things that gave me hope. I remember her telling me that she would always love me, and then I remember her telling me that God would always love me. It was in that moment that I realized that I still had value, that this was something that nobody could ever take away from me. And it was that faith and that knowledge in God that He would always love me that helped me survive the next 9 months. And it continues to help me survive to this day. In my own life and in the countless other lives of survivors that I've spoken with, it has been the power of faith that has allowed us not only to persevere, but to find true peace and happiness.
Elizabeth's return for our family was certainly a miracle. Her ability to move beyond that was equal the miracle. And I think that that is really an important thing to understand, that bad things do happen in our lives, but the most important thing of all is that is something that happened in one point in time. My wife Lois gave this piece of information to Elizabeth, and she'll probably repeat it when she comes. But she said, when you look at life, life is a long expanse, and what has happened to you happened for one very short period of time. Should you allow that one thing to happen to cripple or to devastate your life? As I've had an opportunity of visiting with many survivors, I've had an opportunity of understanding that everyone's pathway back to what used to be their life is different, that there isn't one thing that fits all, and that's certainly true in the area of pornography. The road to recovery and the ability to move forward is something that has to be learned, that is traveled, that is experienced, and there are bumps in the road, and that recovery is not an easy thing. When Elizabeth was abducted, our family experienced one of these traumas, and certainly Elizabeth experienced that trauma. And we didn't know where Elizabeth was, what she was actually experiencing. And certainly those that find themselves entrapped in the addiction of pornography, I believe that if they had been faced with that right offhand, would they have chosen to have gone down that path? Fully understanding what those consequences are is something that I think is very important. As we were preparing to come down here this morning, a pair of my glasses were sitting in the console of the car, and Lois says, well, don't you think maybe you should take these with you? And I said, yes. It's always better to be prepared than scared. And that has been a motto that I have felt is so important. I've advocated for children. I've worked on trying to help bring an ability for them to understand what is happening before them. Many of you have heard of me talk about a program called RAD Kids, Resist Aggression Defensively. And the benefit of the program to me is that it really helps to draw a line in the sand. And that line in the sand represents somebody that wants to hurt you, somebody that you need to be prepared for, and you need to know what you can do to make a change when you find that problem is occurring to you. After Elizabeth's return, we found ourselves wanting to go back to the old normal. And Lois said, let's just leave this behind. And, we wanted to get together as a family, reconnect. Most importantly, we wanted Elizabeth to know that we loved her and that what happened to her was not her fault. That's not always the case, but the fact that we still need to love those people is so incredibly important. We took our first vacation about 2 months after Elizabeth returned, and as we returned from that vacation, one of my neighbors came up to us and said, Ed, somebody was here this morning about 7:30, and he claimed to be a friend of yours. And I said, well, I can't imagine any friend that would come over to my house at 7:30 in the morning unannounced or unplanned. And he said, well, he's indicated that he was going to come back that afternoon. So I said, fine. He didn't say who he was. And that afternoon, about 3:30, this man showed up at the door. He says, Ed, how are you, my friend? And I said, well, I'm doing fine, thank you. And, there were so many people that helped during those 9 months. We were ever grateful to them, but that didn't mean that we necessarily would invite them into our home. And I said, well, we're doing great. And he said, I helped in the search. And I said, well, thank you so much. And he started talking a little bit more about that. And as he started sharing with us, it kind of got a little crazy and a little bit weird. And he says, well, I was there mentally trying to help her. And I said, well, I appreciate that, but I'm going to need to ask you to leave. And he says, well, but Elizabeth and Lois know who I am. And they were just right to the side of me. And they kind of shook their heads and said no. And I said, I really do need to ask you to leave. And as he left, I called my friend Corden Parks at the Salt Lake Police Department, and I said, Corden, we had this fellow that seemed a little different that came up to our house, and I am a little bit concerned. And would you mind checking on him for me? And so the next day, I had a call from him, and Corden indicated to me that they had picked this fellow up and that he had just gotten out of prison the day before, and he was a convicted sex offender. And why he chose to come to our house, I don't know. But that, along with a couple of other experiences, led Lois and I to find that life would not go back to that normal place. And when things happen in our lives, we can't go back. But what we can do is find a new normal. And that is certainly what we had. Subsequent to that, about 3 months later, during that summer, we had a number of people ask us if we would participate in this or endorse that. And we really had no interest in engaging in anything, but we did have an interest re-engaging in our family and having each one of them know that we loved them. We were in church one Sunday, and as I had a migraine, I left, and Elizabeth was coming down with a cold, and she excused herself to go to the bathroom. And as she went to the bathroom, she did not come back. And after 20 minutes, Lois was very concerned about where she was and what was happening. We, as parents, were very conditioned to the response of not having our children where they should be, and that put us on a mode in which we, as parents, wanted to know every second where they were. So Lois asked my daughter, Mary Catherine, to go out and find her. And as she made her way through the building, she came to the last room, which happened to be the women's bathroom. And she pushed on the door, and the door wouldn't open. She pushed a little harder, and finally she rammed into it and knocked the door open. Somebody had been standing behind that door and had sat there saying to Elizabeth, well, Elizabeth, you really ran away, didn't you? And you really loved Brian Mitchell, didn't you? And a number of things that when I heard about it, I was very upset. And I just thought, of all places to think that something like this would happen at church seemed to be just totally outrageous to me. And as I brought the two girls into my study, I was very upset. And I said to Elizabeth, Elizabeth, what you went through was something that I don't know that I could have survived. But I do need you to know one thing, and that is that nobody has the right to hurt you. And if I could share one piece of information with parents out there, to go home and tell their children that nobody has the right to hurt them. And being the president of a group called the Surviving Parents Coalition, as a parent, we had some parents that still had children missing, a couple of us that were fortunate to have our children come home, and others that had a number of children that were deceased. And as I had an opportunity of meeting those parents, I learned a number of things. We were on our first assignment in Washington where we were trying to work on this Adam Walsh Act, which was all about the sex offender registry and creating accountability for sex offenders. And while I was there, I met a new friend, and his name was Flint Waters. And Flint works in Wyoming, and he was with the police department there. And I learned something that I had never known before, and that was about a group called the Internet Crimes Against Children. And I would just appreciate by a raise of hand How many of you have heard of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force? Okay, so there are a fair number of you out there that have learned about them. They are a remarkable group of people, and here in Utah we have a wonderful task force under the Attorney General here, and they do nothing but work on the issue of pornography. And pornography is much like any number of issues that happen out there. There might be curiosity, there might be an interest of what friends are doing. There are any number of reasons why people initially see a piece of pornography, but as in so many other areas of trauma, they don't understand what the final consequences may be of those first few exposures. And as parents, we certainly want to take the steps to help make a change. I want to quickly share with you a map. And this map gives you an idea of what happens with the internet crimes. In this map, you're going to see what happens in a 24-hour period with the sharing of pornography across the United States. What this is representing is people that go online and share and trade child pornography. And, for those, I've had a number of people say to me, well, what is the problem with, seeing a little pornography? And, they would say, a naked child, a naked person, what is the big thing about that? And the big thing about that isn't so much that one picture that they see, but it is what it does and how it leads one down this path. And you can see as we progress how the trading of pornography in a 24-hour period exists. And you can see there we are in Utah, right up there, and it is certainly happening. The way I was first, this map was first shared with me, Flint said to me, he said, I just want to help you understand what happens. And he went on to a peer-to-peer software sharing, and he typed in the letters and numbers 3YO. And I said to him, so what does 3YO mean? And he said to me, Ed, what that stands for is 3-year-old. And on that list under 3YO was this horrendous graphic list of ways in which a child could be abused. And every one of them, of course, was a piece of pornography. You can still see that this, the darker the little red dots get, the multiple times of which that pornography is being viewed, and really what it represents is in the end a crime being committed, and that crime generally being a child rape and in some other type of nightmare. I just want to quickly share with you a couple of experiences that families have that they have had within the Surviving Parents Coalition. Those experiences started with a complete innocence that anything was going on. And I think that is something that happens on a very regular place for those that are that find themselves addicted to pornography. And in one of the cases, there was a young girl by the name of Alicia, And Alicia came from a good home. She was certainly loved and cared for. But she was on the internet, and she was chatting with who she thought was a boyfriend online. And that, of course, was not the case. That was a 50-year-old man who was pretending to be her best friend. So when you find your child becoming showered with attention and potentially gifts, and you might even meet the person, that should be a red flag. That should be a red flag saying, regardless of who this person is out there, beware, watch. Make sure that you have an open line of communication with your child or with your loved one, because that should be a red flag. In this case, this young girl had developed this friendship online in one of the chat rooms. And he said, I want to come up and meet you. Well, he lived in Virginia and she lived in Pittsburgh, and he made his way up to Pittsburgh. And one night, as their family was sitting down to dinner, the doorbell rang and she excused herself. And as she opened the door, this man grabbed her and took her. And her family had no idea what was happening, but he took her down to Virginia, where he literally put a collar around her and chained her in the basement and raped her. But he not only raped her, but he videotaped that. And the saving grace, the thing that did save her, was the fact that since it was being traded online, law enforcement were trying to track where these new pieces of pornography were coming from. They were going to the IP addresses and working backwards to find them. And the day before she was rescued, her captor said to her, he said, I think I like you too much. And that put this stroke of fear in her. And she was very much afraid of what the consequence of that might be. And in her mind, she said, I felt like that was going to be the end of me. And fortunately, the FBI did track this IP address to this home where this pornography was being traded, and she was rescued. Upon return, she found herself in a very interesting situation. She said that, as she went back into her community, she found that people were pointing the finger at her, that she had asked for this, that she held some responsibility for this. And, she never asked for someone to come and abduct her. She never asked for somebody to come and rape her. And it was a long time before she found herself in a position where she felt that people understood her and understood what she had gone through and her ability to move forward. Another one of the families had experienced a situation where the mother and the father were both working. And the mother would go out and basically create events and work those events. So she found herself out of town quite often. And one day as she was coming home, she saw this deluge of FBI and police cars outside her home, and she wondered what in the world was happening. Fortunately, most of her children had gone to school, and they were not home. But as she approached the house, one of the FBI officers came up to her and said to her, I have something to tell you, and we are arresting your husband. And your husband has been abusing your daughter and has been putting this online. And as I think back to the time that Elizabeth was abducted and Lois and I were brought into the police station, of course, our family was looked at very closely. And, the watch is always on the family, because in too many cases, not only is it the family that had some involvement, but they are, the perpetrators. And so this was something that was very unusual. Of course, this mother had no idea of what was going on, and that it had been going on for 4 years. As a parent, of course, she was absolutely devastated. She didn't know what to say to her children. She didn't know how she would manage to take care of their family without her husband being there. But she did know one thing, and that was that, she couldn't go on with life the way it was. And she brought her children home and eventually joined the Surviving Parents Coalition because she did not want to see other parents have to go through what she had experienced. As a parent, we many times try to do our best. And are we equipped to deal with these situations? No. Last night, as I was having dinner with many of the coalition members, there was a comment made, and that was a comment about many clergies, and that was, are the clergies prepared to be able to deal with these types of things? If they had professional training, how can they help? And many times they aren't prepared, and they don't know what to do. And I think of the importance of this conference as a means of intervention, a means of learning what we can do as parents to make a difference, not only in our children's lives, but in our neighborhoods, in our communities. And I think that point starts with an awareness level. And as difficult as it is to talk about sex, to talk about bad things that happen, we still have a responsibility as parents to help prepare our children. And when I say that, be prepared, not scared. When Elizabeth was gone, I heard about many parents who had children that could not get their children back into their room. And certainly the night that Elizabeth came home, we thought that all of the kids would stay in our bedroom. And Elizabeth got up and she said, "No, I want to sleep in my bed and I will be there in the morning." And when I heard that comment, of course, Lois and I were not in bed all night. We were up looking to see what was happening, pinching ourselves to think that this was something that really was real. The fact is, though, that many people find themselves in similar situations, and they don't find themselves with this miraculous miracle that happens. But I do know that miracles happen. And miracles happen in many different ways. And when I think of this conference, I think this is a means of helping to have miracles happen. Recently, the Elizabeth Smart Foundation and Operation Underground Railroad joined forces. And we joined forces because of a couple of things. One is because we wanted to see more miracles happen out there. We wanted to see more children rescued. We also wanted to see that the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force had the power, the funding, and the help to rescue children. That's all that they do, is go out there and try and find those who are being exploited, those that are being abused, and trying to make a difference. Recently, as I was in Mexico City, we had an intervention there where we worked with a Christian ministry, and we went out into the red light district. And I went up here to the Wells Fargo Bank, and I pulled about $4,000 out of an account, and I said, "I need these exchanged into pesos." And the woman says, "What in the world do you want with $4,000 in pesos?" And I said, "Well, I'm going on an interesting mission. We're going into the red light district, and this money is basically being paid to those who are being trafficked and those that are being prostituted." And they kind of stepped back and said to me, "Well, that's interesting." And I said, "It is interesting, actually." And as we went down there and participated in this intervention, we first drove down this street, Sullivan Street in Mexico City, and it's one that's known very much for prostitution and for trafficking. And as we went down that street, I thought, well, this intervention, it doesn't seem like there are that many here. And at the stroke of midnight, our so-called block party started. And in that block party, we had these 50 Christian ministry young women go out and hand a rose out to all of these women on the street and invite them to come to dinner. And this dinner actually started with a mariachi band as we carried the tables and chairs down to the corner where we set up this opportunity for dinner. Earlier that day, I had met a woman who had been trafficked on that block for 16 years. And as I had an opportunity of hearing her story, which was horrific, I also was very concerned about her ability to go with us, which she insisted on doing that night. And she was in her late 40s, and I thought of trafficking and prostitution, and I've had some people comment to me, well, that's a path that they have chosen. And, so far I have not come up against one person who had chosen that path. That night ended in the entire street being cleared. They all came to dinner. They all knew that people care, and on the stroke of midnight happened to represent International Women's Day. And, it wasn't a matter of just providing them with a dinner, but letting them know that somebody cared about them rather than somebody wanting some commodity, wanting some other piece of, I would call, live pornography. In the end, though, these women knew that people cared about them. And I think that's probably one of the most important things that can come from this conference, that people do care. It's not so much about pointing the finger. People find themselves entrapped in different ways, but finding their way out is something that is not always easy. And it is truly a path that is difficult. And certainly these women that have been on the street for a number of years find themselves in a very difficult situation. I want to just quickly share with you another story about a young girl named Carlita. Carlita grew up in Mexico City, and she came from a good family, and at the age of 12, she was feeling these kind of rebellious feelings, and, people don't understand me, my parents don't understand me, or they won't let me do this, or they won't let me do that. And let me tell you that since Elizabeth's return, overnighters were something I just do not allow in our family because I think that it represents too much risk. But Carlita was a young girl, and she had found at school this person that was just showering with her with attention. And she just loved this attention. He understood her. He understood her needs. He gave her gifts. He was just this amazing supposed knight in white armor that had come to rescue her. And certainly she had found herself in a position that she did not recognize herself as a victim. She thought she was the luckiest person in the world. She had found this young man who just seemed to understand her, to love her, and shower her with attention. Well, a few months went by, and this relation kept moving along, and finally he invited her to go with him to his home, which was a couple hours outside of outside of Mexico City. And as she went with him, she went and asked her parents, and her father said, well, I guess you can do that. And her mother said, absolutely not. And if you choose to do that, don't bother coming back. She's great. I'm out of here. She picked up her things and she left. As she left, she went and saw had this wonderful apartment their boyfriend had. He seemed to have everything. But she also noticed these women that would occasionally come in, And she said to her boyfriend, "Well, you're not going to ask me to do that, are you?" "Oh, no, I'm not going to ask you to do that." And he said time went by, and they just had this great relationship, and it just didn't seem like it could get any better. And he said to her, "Well, in order for us to enjoy this lifestyle, I really need your help." And she said, "Well, you're not going to ask me to do this, are you?" And he said, "No, I'm not going to ask you to do that, but maybe you could go out and help clean someone's house and help bring some money in that way." And Carlita found herself in this position of trying to help support supposedly them, and things got worse. She found herself pregnant. She had a period of time in which she developed a relationship with this baby, and subsequent, the baby was taken away from her, and her supposed boyfriend gave the baby to his mother, and he subsequently kicked her out on the street and said, "You will go and do this." And she found herself being trafficked on the street. And the comment was made by her that it was not just once or twice a day, but that it was up to 60 times a day. And when I heard this, I just felt sick. She found herself lacking in hope. She couldn't see how she could get out of this, and she wanted to be able to move forward with her life. Fortunately, there was a John that came along that did not want to have sex, that talked to her and helped her find a way out. He said, "I'll pay for 4 days, and then you can get out, and we'll take you to a safe house." And the so-called boyfriend said, well, under the guise that she was going back to meet her family, said, that would be okay, because he was being paid for that time. So she left, and she got away, and she went into this shelter where she didn't get out of there for a number of years. She's currently 22, married, had another girl, and this past November, she attended a conference that the Vatican put on trafficking, and shared her story there, and shared the lack of hope that she found herself in during that traffic period, and found how, and shared how she got out of this nightmare. In the end, she closed the conference with prayer, and the point in sharing this story with you is that there are horrible things that happen, but there is hope. I've about used the time up. Elizabeth has joined me, and at this point I'm going to turn the time over to her to share with you some experience. But I second Pamela's comment to please everyone share the message with others. It's not an easy message, it's not a comfortable message, but it is a very important message that needs to be shared.
It's great to be with you this morning. Sorry I'm a little bit late, but I have had the honor to travel around the country and meet and work with so many different people. And the one thing that I've always found that everybody has in common is that we all have problems. I mean, none of us have a perfect life. No matter how good we may look on Facebook, there's always a story behind those posts. I mean, nobody just has it made. And if they do, then they should probably be up here speaking. But I've never met them. And I have been amazed at all the different ways people find to move forward, the ways that they find to cope, what works for them. And then again, I've been amazed at how difficult and how hard and how impossible at times it seems for us to move forward. But there is always hope. There is always a reason to move forward. There's always that glimmer, and we never exactly know how how it's going to affect us, how life is going to affect us, how what we go through is going to affect others. I mean, I don't think anybody realizes the effect, just how wide the effect of just one single action is. It's pretty amazing, and I don't think we will realize until at the end of life and we've figured everything out and we get a playback of our entire lives and we can see how our actions affected others. I'm so grateful to be standing before you now today because there was a point in my life when I didn't think I could move on, and I'm guessing everyone here could probably say exactly what that moment was. When I was kidnapped, I remember so many times feeling like I couldn't move on, and I didn't want to. I just wanted to give up. I wanted to surrender because to me it just was too hard. But somehow time would keep on passing, and I'd make it through that moment, and then I'd make it through that day, and I made it through 9 months. And when I got home after being kidnapped, I remember just feeling like I was ready to just forget everything that happened to me. I wanted to leave it behind me. I wanted to take my life back. I wanted to go back to the way things had been before I was kidnapped. I was just ready to go back to being me. Things didn't quite go that way. I mean, everybody still knew my name, and everybody still knew a lot about what had happened to me, and that was a really big adjustment for me. But I found a new normal. My family and I, we found our new normal, and I really just kind of thought, okay, this is great. This is fine. I can deal with this, no problem. But I'm going to go on and I'm going to live my life. I finished high school, I went to college, I did study abroad, I served a mission. My trial came and went, and when sort of that period of my life was over after the trial, I started thinking about all of the blessings that I'd been given in my life and all the people who have helped me and prayed for me and searched for me, and how grateful I felt to all of them. And I remember talking to my dad and saying, well, I'd really like to do something more. I really want to make a difference. Do you have any ideas? And he said, well, you could start by sharing your story, and we can start this nonprofit, and we can do all these number of things. And so I remember when he mentioned sharing my story, well, I was doubtful, I guess, that anyone would want to listen to me. But I said, okay, well, I'll give it a shot. So I remember I started doing a couple speeches here and there, and the more I spoke, the more people started coming up to me and sharing with me their stories, whether it was being kidnapped, whether it was being abused, whether it was being forced to pose for pornography, trafficking, just everything across the board. And I was amazed. I mean, I know the statistics. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused before they're 18. I mean, I knew that this was a huge problem, but until I had these people start coming up to me and sharing their stories with me, I just couldn't believe it. Anyways, about a year ago, I'm positive my dad has mentioned Operation Underground Railroad, so I won't go into detail about what it does, because I'm sure he filled you in on that. Anyways, we met with this organization, and the founder of it, he and I became good friends, and he said, well, Elizabeth, I know you were held during your captivity while you were kidnapped down in Southern California. How would you feel about coming down there with me and bringing the software down that the Internet Crimes Against Children task forces use to reintroduce to their task forces down there to help them get a hands-on experience? I mean, how would you feel about that? And I remember saying, well, I would definitely be interested in it. And he said, well, great, let's plan it. We can go down there, we can talk about the software, we can talk about Rad Kids, this child empowerment program. We can go into the schools, we can meet with the city leaders. And so I said, okay, that sounds great, let's do it. And I remember going down there, and I remember talking to the city leaders. I remember talking to some schools. I remember going in and talking to the ICAC task forces. And I remember when I was talking to them, I shared this experience of while I had been kidnapped. The second day that I was kidnapped, I guess I have to rewind a little bit. The first day that I was kidnapped, my two captors said, well, cry today because tomorrow you can't cry anymore. You can't talk about your family anymore. You can't think about them. Today is actually a really happy day. You really should be grateful you're here with us. But tomorrow, we are going to pretend like we are Adam and Eve back in the Garden of Eden. And we're going to go naked the whole day. And, I'm going to show you how sex is performed, basically. And I remember being I don't even think there are really words to describe it, appalled, abhorred, I would have done anything in the world. I mean, I would have, scrubbed floors for the rest of my life with a toothbrush. I mean, I would have done anything other than be in that situation and then know what was going to have to happen the next day. Well, the next day came, and everything he said that he was going to do, he did. I was forced to go naked the whole day. He raped me. He had all these terrible things planned out. And I remember telling these ICACs about that day and just saying how for the longest time, I couldn't imagine anything worse than that in the entire world. To me, that was, it was just the pinnacle of terrible. And then I said when I came back and I started to become more and more involved, I started meeting other children, other survivors of child abuse, of rape, but their situation took it a step farther because as they were being abused, as they were being raped, as they were being tortured, they had been recorded, they had been photographed, they had been splashed across the internet, they had been traded to their captor's friends or to his sex ring or whatever it was. And when I started thinking about that, I realized that is the one thing that would have made my situation worse, is having it recorded, having it traded, having it sent around to different people. And then, if I ever survived, if I ever made it away and I went out into public, how would I know if people were being nice to me just because they're nice people or if because, they saw something on the internet? And were people smiling at me because they're friendly or because, they saw me being raped? And I just remember telling them how that would have made my situation so much worse. And so that was why, what they were doing was so, so important. This software was so important. Working to rescue these children who are being traded, who are being taken photos of, videos of, and no regard for their lives or their childhood whatsoever. Anyways, I talked and it was good. Anyways, I came back to Utah, and then I got a phone call about a week later saying, Elizabeth, how would you like to come with us on a raid? We have caught this. Well, we know exactly where this man lives. He has been downloading a manual on how to rape children, and we would like you there with us when we go and pick him up. And so I said, yes, I would love to be there. Absolutely. So I flew back down to Southern California, and I remember the morning. I sat in the police briefing with the whole team. And then I remember driving up to this guy's house. And as we drove up the street, every house along the street had carriages or strollers, or when I say carriage, I mean stroller, balls or little slides, just toys. Every house had toys in front of it. And I remember we finally pulled up in front of this one house. We went up to the door and knocked on the door. As soon as this man saw us, he immediately said, "My friends use my computer all the time. I don't know what's on there." We hadn't even said anything yet. He didn't even know why we were there. But anyways, the police went in and interrogated him. I would have loved to have interrogated him, but that was not allowed. Anyways, he eventually admitted that it was him. He had downloaded this manual. He had downloaded many other files of child pornography. He was in the process of trying to become a foster parent so that he could have a child at his disposal, but that he had not completed the process. He hadn't touched any children yet, and I don't know how the police were able to verify that, but they were. Anyways, that was a miracle. He is now in jail, but he was not able to touch any children. He was not able to hurt any children. And for me, that was such an incredible experience because I wasn't on the victim end of things this time. I was there on the doing something about it side. I mean, I was there. It was just amazing because that was the same area where I remember being taken through, where I remember being raped, and to be able to go back and to see this change taking place and knowing that this man is never going to be able to hurt any children, it was a miracle to me. And I know that so many of you are on that front line every day working to stop child pornography period, because it is terrible and it's a disease and it's a sickness that nobody should be infected with. And I want to say thank you so much to everyone who cares and who's here and who's trying to make a difference, because you really do make a difference. And it's so encouraging when I'm able to come to conventions like today, conferences like today, and see a whole room full of people that are working together to try to make a difference, instead of just feeling like there's a select few out there who are just pounding their heads against a brick wall. So I want to say thank you so much. Thank you for your patience in waiting for me. Truly, God bless every single one of you. Thank you.